The extremely controversial dismissal of Julian Nagelsmann from Bayern remains the hot topic even a few days after it actually happened. It's significant that there are still many questions, theories and suspicions, although both the sporting director of the German club Hasan Salihamidzic and the chief executive officer Oliver Kahn during their joint press conference were not only confident but also pretty candid, citing three main reasons behind such an unexpected move. Lack of consistency is the first of them. Bayern, headed by Nagelsmann, recently squandered a seemingly comfortable 9 points cushion in relation to Borussia Dortmund and eventually relinquished the lead after the loss to Bayer Leverkusen. Julian didn't have the team behind him anymore, both emotionally and tactically. This is the reason number two. Thirdly, the bosses of the German giant didn't want to miss out the opportunity in the form of Thomas Tuchel, who by the summer could well sign a contract with the other club, Real Madrid or Tottenham. Both Salihamidzic and Kahn also openly reversed the logic of those skeptics who claimed that such a stressful and desperate reshuffle will inevitably destroy the team's chances to finish the campaign strongly. According to the chiefs of Bayern, they, on the contrary, tried to avoid the looming failure and brought Tuchel in order to get more guarantees and reduce the danger, whilst all three major titles are still within the reach. And here the most interesting begins. Tuchel instead of Nagelsmann. It's not only search for a better and more skillful head coach, although it would be fair to point out that Thomas's track record is longer and more attractive in general, but at first place the choice in favor of another playing style, the one which gives more reliability and predictability. Hence, not only Tuchel replaced Nagelsmann, but also the fast football made way for the combinational one. And now it's time to look at history. It's widely known that the German football is all about speed, intensity and open play, but it's also pretty curious that Bayern in the last 50 plus years tried and successfully did it to disengage from this manner as far as possible, showcasing football that is at least one bit slower than their Bundesliga neighbors are playing in, but at the same time is extremely sophisticated and intelligent, based on nifty passing. By the way, the German national team, in its best reincarnations, also acted in this manner and won all the major tournaments, including the last one to this date, the World Cup 2014 in Brazil, using this type of football, which I would call combinational or mildly combinational. On top of that, almost all the eminent German coaches were representatives of that style. Helmut Schön, Udo Lattek, Franz Beckenbauer, Bertie Fox and Jupp Heynckes worked strictly this way. As for the flexible and resourceful Otto Rehhagel and Ottmar Hitzfeld, they also had this weapon in their arsenal and used to gladly unsheath it when the time, circumstances, personnel and opponents were right. Joachim Löw, in his turn, did exactly this in 2012, making a transition from predominantly up-tempo style to a more measured and intelligently orientated football when he deemed that his national squad is good and mature enough for it. As we all know, he reaped the reward quite soon. Hans-Dieter Flick and Tuchel are two last German managers to this day who expressed themselves through this sort of play. It's worth mentioning that this type of football requires a lot of talent, technical quality and finesse. That's why such model was so popular in the cases of Bayern and the national team, two main forces of the German football that traditionally have an opportunity to gather the best players. As for the up-tempo play, it has one peculiarity. Whatever modern, attractive, flashy and spectacular this approach is, it rarely gives stability. Fast football is a perfect weapon to surprise or to be competitive, but in the meantime, it brings very little guarantee and assurance. It's truly a proverbial double-edged sword. For exactly this reason, currently there are dozens and dozens specialists in Europe who are disciples of the philosophy of fast play, but only one of them is considered as an undeniable world-class manager. This is Jürgen Klopp, and the irony is that he is also German. But even he, despite glittering career and stellar achievements, is often struggling to sustain a certain standard of quality, especially this term, when Klopp's Liverpool are hardly recognizable both in terms of intensity and results. The reasons behind such precarity are transparent. Fast football is paired with superhuman efforts and extremely energy consuming, and it's really tough to retain a high level of performance and mobility when the fixture is tight and opponents are as strong or almost as strong as you are. The prime example of it is Bundesliga, when in a concrete game on its day, every team could spring a surprise and beat a favorite, even if it is the mighty Bayern, but at the same time, basically all the other German outfits are lacking consistency and easily could lose in almost each match. This is the other side of the coin. The truth is that fast football is heavily dependent on physical shape, and should only it drop a little, a team became much more fragile and vulnerable. This is exactly in which Nagelsmann has been accused of. When Bayern were at full pelt, the team looked like the best on the continent, scoring almost at will, but as soon as the curve of physical levels was going down, the results deteriorated immediately and exponentially, especially on the domestic arena, where to this were added some stylistic features. Playing against many Bundesliga clubs, the perennial champions of Germany were forced to attack in a much slower pace than they wanted, facing a wall of 10 men in front of the opposing box. For Nagelsmann, who trains speed above all and very much prefers a quick, direct delivery of the ball, this flow of the game was almost like a torture, especially with the loss of Robert Lewandowski, who in the previous campaign used to bail out Bayern on numerous occasions with his unique ability to score after the crosses and rebounds. On the other hand, it's hard to use the Pool's move to Barcelona as an excuse or alibi for the young coach, keeping in mind the fact that one of the reasons prompted Robert to leave Munich was the new system of play, or to be more precise, the lack of service in the positional attack. Lewandowski complained that in the second half of the previous season he was getting much less passes, both in terms of quality and quantity, and it's definitely not a coincidence, given that a long build-up play under Nagelsmann is less effective and sleek than it was when Bayern have been managed by Flick. In order to realize how much the German champions lost in this particular football phase, just look at the stats. In comparison to the 2020-2021 season, the team this term scored about 15 goals less through a positional attack, bearing in mind that roughly one quarter of the current campaign has been left. 15 goals, this is a huge number, even by the standards of Bundesliga, with its evident neglect of defense. Moreover, if we take the number of goals scored after at least 15 consecutive passes, the ratio will be even more in Flick's team favor, somewhat 5-1 or maybe 6-7 to 1. Meanwhile, in the Champions League, where the likes of Barcelona, Inter and the static PSG were leaving a lot of room to operate, Bayern maintained an unblemished record, but the tough, in a way even hostile draw hindered Nagelsmann's prospects on this front too. In the upcoming showdown with the powerful Manchester City, the odds were, and probably are, not exactly in the German champions' favor. On top of that, in the semi-final, Bayern, in case of advancing to this stage, will have to face either Real Madrid or Chelsea, which is also by no means an easy task. Bearing in mind that it would be problematic, to say the least, to go all the way in the most prestigious continental competition, Salihamidzic and Kahn were even more concerned about recent issues in Bundesliga. In the event if Bayern's seemingly eternal dominance in Germany would have been over without a worthy compensation in the form of European triumph, the bosses of the club themselves will be very much at risk if they recall how much has been spent on new players both in the summer and winter. As a consequence, both Bayern's chiefs started to looking for a new coach, the one who could rectify the weaknesses of positional offense, and the search surely wasn't long, given that Tuchel has been the only manager who meets all requirements. It would be fair to say that he even exceeded them, if we recall that the lanky Thomas is not only a well-known master of installing a nifty and good-looking build-up, but also has an uncanny knack to do it very quickly, almost instantaneously, taking Mainz and Borussia Dortmund from the capable hands of Klopp in the past. He, in both cases, swiftly modified the play to his liking, making a smooth transition from fast football to the more measured one. In other words, Tuchel did exactly the same what he has to do now in Munich. Apart from it, the Bayern bosses certainly were orientated on the grey-bearded Germans' experience at Chelsea in 2021, inheriting from Frank Lampard an alien squad full of various problems. He immediately propelled it to the Champions League triumph, the result which both Salihamidzic and Kahn are craving for. It's useful to remember that Bayern itself won this competition for the last time to this date in 2020, using very similar approach, swapping an up-tempo style of play which has been cultivated by Niko Kovac for the more combinational and intelligent one which was Flick's recipe. The latter back then has been able to drastically improve the performance without changing any key figures on the pitch. The same is expected from Tuchel, who is, by the way, really good in improving his players in terms of making decisions on the pitch and passing ability. It's also really curious that back in 2019, Thomas has been considered the leading candidate to replace Kovac on a permanent basis, but Flick, who was initially appointed as an interim manager, distinguished himself so brilliantly that all the question marks have fallen away. As a result, Tuchel continued to train PSG and led it to the Champions League final, where he lost to Bayern. Digging deeper, it's getting clear that the German was a matter of Bayern's interest even earlier, in the late 2017, when the search for Heinkes' heir was started. But Uli Hoeneß, who has been the president of the club back then, tried to persuade Jupp to stay at the helm for another season, at least, and had some doubts regarding Tuchel, forcing the latter to concentrate on PSG. So Tuchel at Bayern was a long overdue project, and this partnership has a lot of reasons to be fruitful. Will it last long? It's another matter. Rather no than yes, I would say, being mindful of the fact that despite his pure coaching assets and talents, the tall German is notoriously hard individual, demanding, irritable, and authoritative, but the Bayern board already had taken that precaution by signing him only for 2 years and a bit, which is interestingly enough a much shorter period of time that has been originally given to Nagelsmann, whose contract was and technically still is valid until the summer of 2026. As for Julian himself, he has now some time to reflect and recover. One thing is for certain, even if his tenure at Bayern didn't bring the results he wished and hoped for, the stocks of the young German are still high. It would be a safe bet to say that his next destination will be an English club, bearing in mind the combination of two factors. Whilst Nagelsmann has no clear motivation to resume the work in his native country, the Premier League is another competition where the fast football is really the way to play. What job he will take and when, this is a much harder question. It's apparent that Tottenham are really interested, but the former Bayern manager probably will prefer to bide his time and wait for an offer from the suffering Chelsea, the club which lately bought a batch of footballers that are suited to an up-tempo style. In the event if this proposal won't come in the next few months, Nagelsmann could afford to take a proper sabbatical in order to evaluate his options in 2024, still getting full salary from Bayern. Whatever you may say, even such stressful and unexpected dismissal has some pluses.